Madison Hayes, a 68-year-old Army veteran, stood frozen by his wife's fresh grave, his eyes locked on the simple headstone that read Clara Hayes, beloved wife and mother. The autumn wind swept through Willow Grove Cemetery, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Madison's hands, scarred from years of service, clutched a single red rose, the kind Clara always loved. He wore his old dress uniform, the green fabric faded but pressed, with a small American flag pin glinting on his lapel. Just moments ago, he'd whispered promises to Clara, vows to keep her memory alive. But now, a young HOA security officer, Jason Carter, stepped forward, his flashlight cutting through the evening dusk. "Sir, you're trespassing on private property," Jason said, his voice sharp. "This cemetery is under HOA rules, and visiting hours ended at sunset." Madison's heart sank. He'd been there since Clara's funeral that morning, lost in grief, unaware of the time. The cemetery, nestled in the heart of Willow Grove's gated community, was quiet except for the distant hum of a lawnmower. Headstones glowed faintly under the moonlight, and Clara's grave, still covered in fresh dirt, held scattered petals from the service. Madison had served 15 years in the Army, earning a Purple Heart after a shrapnel wound in a desert conflict. He'd married Clara in 1979, and they built a life in this neighborhood, raising 2 daughters who now lived far away. Clara's 3-year fight with leukemia had drained their savings, but Madison never left her side, holding her hand through every hospital visit. When she passed 5 days ago, it felt like the world had ripped out his anchor. Standing by her grave was his way of holding on, of saying the goodbye he couldn't finish at the funeral. Jason, only 26 and new to the HOA security team, had been hired to enforce the community's strict rules. The HOA managed the cemetery, a private plot for residents, and Jason had been told to clear out anyone after hours. He'd gotten a call from a resident about a suspicious figure lingering past closing. Seeing Madison, an old man in a worn uniform, Jason assumed he was a drifter who'd snuck in. "Sir, I need you to leave now, or I'll have to escort you out," Jason said, gripping his radio. Madison looked up, his gray eyes heavy with sorrow. "This is my wife's grave," he said softly. "I just need a few more minutes." Jason frowned, checking his watch. Rules were rules, and he wasn't about to let an old man bend them. Madison's mind drifted to Clara's laugh, how she'd tease him for saluting her every morning. He'd promised her he'd stay strong, but now, facing Jason's cold stare, he felt small. "I've been here since the funeral," Madison tried to explain, his voice cracking. "I lost track of time." Jason shook his head, stepping closer. "You're not supposed to be here. Move, or I'll make you." The words hit Madison like a punch. He'd fought for his country, carried wounded soldiers to safety, and now he was being treated like a criminal at Clara's graveside. His knees trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of losing her all over again. Jason radioed for backup, his voice tense. "I've got an uncooperative individual at the cemetery," he said. Within minutes, 2 more HOA security officers, Emily Brooks and Michael Turner, arrived in a golf cart, their flashlights bouncing across the graves. Emily, a single mother trying to prove herself, followed Jason's lead. Michael, older and more cautious, hesitated but stayed quiet. "Sir, hands behind your back," Jason ordered, pulling out zip ties. Madison's heart raced. He wasn't resisting, but his slow movements, stiff from arthritis, made Jason impatient. "I'm not a threat," Madison said, his voice steady despite the grief choking him. "I just want to say goodbye to my wife." The situation grew tense as Jason snapped the zip ties around Madison's wrists. The plastic bit into his skin, reminding him of a time he'd been briefly captured during a mission. The humiliation of restraint. Emily shone her flashlight in his face, mistaking his shaking for defiance. "Stop moving," she barked. Madison caught a glimpse of Clara's headstone, the rose he dropped lying beside it. He thought of her last words in the hospital. "You're my hero, Madison. Don't ever forget that." Now, bound like a thief, he felt he was failing her. The cemetery, once a place of peace, felt like a trap closing around him. A small crowd began to gather at the cemetery's edge, residents drawn by the commotion. Ashley Bennett, A neighbor who'd known Clara from book club recognized Madison. "That's Mr. Hayes," she whispered to her husband, Daniel Hayes, a retired Marine. Ashley's heart broke seeing Madison in zip ties. She pulled out her phone, calling friends to spread the word. Daniel, who'd met Madison at a local veterans event, felt a surge of anger. "This isn't right," he muttered, grabbing his old Marine jacket. He dialed a few buddies from his unit, his voice urgent. "A veteran's in trouble at the cemetery. We need to move." The hook of injustice tightened as Jason pushed Madison toward the golf cart. "You're coming with us," he said, ignoring Madison's pleas. The old veteran stumbled, his legs weak from grief and age. Jason saw the stumble as resistance and reached for his taser. "Last chance," he warned. Madison's eyes locked on Clara's grave, a silent apology forming in his mind. He didn't know that help was already on the way, that the community he'd served was about to stand up for him. Madison Hayes stood hunched in the dim light of Willow Grove Cemetery, his wrists bound by tight zip ties, the cold plastic cutting into his skin. The red rose he dropped lay crushed near Clara's grave, its petals scattered like his fading hope. Jason Carter, the young HOA security officer, gripped Madison's arm, pulling him toward the golf cart. "Move it, old man," Jason snapped, his voice sharp with impatience. Madison's eyes stayed on Clara's headstone, her name glowing faintly in the moonlight. He whispered, "I'm sorry, Clara," his heart heavy with the thought of leaving her behind. The distant hum of the neighborhood faded, replaced by the crunch of gravel under Jason's boots and the murmurs of the growing crowd. Emily Brooks, the second HOA officer, stood nearby, her flashlight shaking slightly. She joined the HOA security team to support her son, not to harass grieving widowers. But Jason's confidence made her follow his lead. "He's not listening," she said, her voice unsure. Michael Turner, the third officer, shifted uncomfortably. He'd seen Madison at the local diner, always tipping extra despite his worn-out wallet. "Maybe we should check his story," Michael muttered, but Jason shot him a glare. "Rules are rules. He's trespassing." Madison's slow steps, weighed down by arthritis and grief, only fueled Jason's frustration. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Jason said, his hand hovering over his taser. The crowd at the cemetery's edge grew louder, their whispers turning to shouts. Ashley Bennett, clutching her phone, recorded the scene, her hands trembling with anger. "This is wrong," she told her husband, Daniel Hayes, who was already texting his Marine buddies. "Madison's a veteran. He doesn't deserve this." Daniel, a retired Marine with a limp from an old injury, nodded grimly. He'd shared stories with Madison at the VFW Hall, knew about Clara's long fight with cancer, and remembered Madison's quiet pride in his Purple Heart. "He's one of us," Daniel said, his voice low but firm. His text reached 4 other Marines, Jake, Sarah, Liam, and Ethan, all living nearby. They agreed to meet at the cemetery gates, their loyalty to a fellow veteran stronger than any HOA rule. Back at the grave, a twist unfolded. Jason's radio crackled, and a voice from the HOA office broke through. "Carter, confirm the trespasser's ID," it said. Jason pulled Madison's wallet from his pocket, flipping it open. The faded military ID inside showed Madison's rank and service years. For a moment, Jason hesitated, his eyes flickering with doubt. But his pride took over. "Doesn't change anything," he muttered, tossing the wallet onto the golf cart seat. Madison's voice was steady despite his shaking hands. "I fought for this country. I just want to stay with my wife a little longer." Jason scoffed. "Save the sob story." Emily frowned, her gut telling her this was wrong, but she stayed silent, afraid of losing her job. Then came another twist. A teenage boy, Tyler, pushed through the crowd, his bike skidding to a stop. He was Clara's nephew, visiting for the funeral. "That's my uncle," he shouted, his voice cracking. "He's not a criminal." Tyler had been at the funeral, watching Madison lay that rose on Clara's casket. The crowd murmured louder, some pulling out phones to record. Ashley zoomed in, capturing Jason's scowl and Madison's pained expression. Tyler ran toward Madison, but Emily blocked him. "Stay back, kid," she said, her voice softer now. Tyler's eyes blazed. "You're hurting him." He's family. Madison's heart lifted at Tyler's voice, a flicker of Clara's stubborn spirit in the boy. But the zip ties tightened as Jason yanked him forward. The situation spiraled as Jason's impatience boiled over. Madison stumbled again, his bad knee giving out. "Stop resisting," Jason yelled, pulling his taser. Michael stepped forward, alarmed. "Jason, hold on. He's not fighting." But Jason, feeling the crowd's eyes on him, acted fast. The taser's prongs shot out, hitting Madison in the side. The old veteran gasped, collapsing to his knees, his body shaking as the electric jolt tore through him. The crowd gasped, Ashley's video capturing every second. "They tossed him," she cried, her voice echoing. Tyler screamed, "Uncle Madison," and tried to run forward, but Emily held him back, her own eyes wide with shock. Daniel Hayes, now at the cemetery gates, saw the flash of the taser. His Marine instincts kicked in. He signaled Jake, Sarah, Liam, and Ethan, who'd just arrived in their dress blues, their faces set with purpose. "That's our brother," Daniel said, his voice like steel. The Marines moved as one, their boots hitting the pavement in perfect rhythm. They didn't shout or rush, but their presence was a force, cutting through the evening air. The crowd parted, sensing something big was coming. Madison, still on the ground, clutched aside, his mind flashing to Clara's smile, her hand in his during their last dance. He didn't know help was closing in, but he felt a spark of hope, as if Clara was watching over him. Madison Hayes lay on the cold ground of Willow Grove Cemetery, his body aching from the taser's jolt. The sharp pain in his side mixed with the deeper ache of Clara's absence. His vision blurred, but he could still see her headstone, the red rose crushed nearby. The crowd's shouts grew louder, a mix of anger and shock. "Let him go," someone yelled. Jason Carter stood over Madison, his taser still in hand, his face red with frustration. "Stay down," he barked, glancing at the crowd. Emily Brooks held Tyler, Madison's nephew, who was thrashing to reach his uncle. "You're monsters," Tyler shouted, tears streaming down his face. Emily's grip softened, her own eyes wet. She whispered, "I didn't sign up for this." Michael Turner, the third HOA officer, stepped closer to Jason. "This is too far," he said, his voice low but firm. "He's an old man, not a threat." Jason spun on him. "You want to explain this to the HOA board?" He broke the rules. Michael shook his head, glancing at Madison's trembling form. He'd seen the military ID, knew Madison was a veteran. Guilt twisted in his gut. He'd stayed quiet too long, hoping to keep his job. Now, watching Madison gasp for breath, he regretted it. "We need to call this off," Michael said, reaching for his radio. Jason grabbed his arm. "Don't you dare. I'm in charge here." The tension between the officers crackled, a new twist in the chaos. Ashley Bennett, still recording, pushed closer, her phone capturing Madison's pained expression and Tyler's desperate cries. "This is going viral," she told Daniel Hayes, her husband, who stood at the cemetery gates with 4 Marines, Jake, Sarah, Liam, and Ethan. Their dress blues gleamed under the streetlights, their steps steady as they approached. Daniel's limp didn't slow him down. His eyes were locked on Madison. "He saved lives in combat," Daniel said to his team. "We're not letting him be treated like this." Sarah, the only woman in the group, nodded. "Semper Fi," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of their shared code. A sudden twist broke the standoff. A woman's voice cut through the crowd. "Stop this right now." It was Mrs. Linda Carter, Jason's mother and a longtime HOA board member. She'd been called by a neighbor who saw Ashley's live stream on social media. Linda, a widow herself, recognized Madison from Clara's funeral. "Jason, what are you doing?" she demanded, her face pale. Jason froze, the taser slipping slightly in his grip. "Mom, he's trespassing," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Linda pushed past Emily, kneeling beside Madison. "Mr. Hayes, I'm so sorry," she said, her hands gentle as she helped him sit up. Madison coughed, his voice weak. "I just wanted to stay with Clara." The crowd roared, some cheering Linda, others yelling at Jason. Tyler broke free from Emily, running to Madison. "Uncle, you okay?" he asked, his voice shaking. Madison managed a nod, gripping Tyler's hand. "I'm still here, kid," he said, his words a quiet promise. Linda turned to Jason, her eyes blazing. "You tossed a veteran at his wife's grave? Are you out of your mind?" Jason's face fell, the weight of his mistake hitting him. Emily stepped back, her flashlight dropping to her side. "I didn't know he was a veteran," she mumbled, guilt choking her words. Michael finally acted, radioing the HOA office. "We need the director here now," he said, ignoring Jason's glare. Another twist unfolded as a loud honk echoed from the cemetery entrance. A black SUV screeched to a stop, and out stepped Mr. Robert Klein, the HOA president. He'd been alerted by the growing social media storm, with Ashley's video already racking up thousands of views. Robert, a stern man in his 50s, marched toward the scene, his face tight with anger. "Carter, explain yourself," he snapped. Jason tried to justify his actions, pointing at Madison. He refused to leave after hours. Robert's eyes narrowed as he saw Madison still on the ground, with Linda and Tyler beside him. "That's Madison Hayes," Robert said, his voice cold. "His wife's funeral was today. You tossed him." Jason's confidence crumbled, his hands shaking. The Marines reached the scene, their presence silencing the crowd. Daniel Hayes stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Officers, step away from Mr. Hayes," he said. Jason hesitated, but the sight of 5 Marines in dress blues made him pause. Sarah spoke next, her tone steady. "This man served our country. You're disrespecting him and his wife's memory." The crowd murmured in agreement, phones still recording. Madison looked up, seeing Daniel's familiar face. A memory flashed, sharing a beer with Daniel at the VFW, talking about Clara's courage. "Daniel," Madison whispered, his voice hoarse. "Thank you." Daniel knelt beside him, his hand on Madison's shoulder. "We've got you, brother." The situation hung on a knife's edge. Robert Klein, sensing the crowd's anger and the Marines' authority, turned to Jason. "Release him." "Now," he ordered. Jason fumbled with the zip ties, his hands clumsy under the weight of every eye on him. Emily helped, her fingers trembling as she cut the ties. Madison rubbed his wrists, his eyes back on Clara's grave. The rose was gone, trampled in the chaos, but he felt Clara's strength in him. The Marines formed a quiet circle around him, their silence louder than any shout. The crowd watched, holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Madison Hayes sat on the cold cemetery ground, his wrists free but still stinging from the zip ties. The moonlight cast shadows over Clara's grave, her headstone a quiet reminder of the life they'd shared. The crowd at Willow Grove Cemetery buzzed with anger, their phones glowing as they recorded. Daniel Hayes and the 4 Marines, Jake, Sarah, Liam, and Ethan, stood around Madison, their dress blues a wall of honor. Daniel's hand rested on Madison's shoulder. "You're not alone," he said, his voice steady. Madison nodded, his throat tight. He saw Clara's smile in his mind, her voice telling him to stay strong. The pain from the taser lingered, but the Marine's presence gave him strength. Jason Carter stood frozen, the taser dangling in his hand. His mother, Linda Carter, glared at him, her voice sharp. "You've shamed us, Jason," she said. "This man's a hero, and you treated him like trash." Jason's face burned, the crowd stares heavy. He wanted to argue, to say he was just doing his job, but the words stuck. Emily Brooks, her eyes red, stepped forward. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know who you were." Madison looked at her, his gray eyes soft but tired. "You didn't ask," he said quietly, the words cutting deeper than any shout. Michael Turner, silent until now, nodded. "We messed up," he admitted, his voice low. A new twist shook the scene. A loud voice boomed from the crowd. "This is on you, Klein." It was Mrs. Ellen Parker, a retired nurse and longtime resident. She'd known Clara from church and had helped care for her during her illness. Ellen pushed forward, her cane tapping the ground. "Your HOA rules are heartless," she shouted at Robert Klein, the HOA president. "You let your guards tase a grieving man." Robert's face tightened. He prided himself on keeping Willow Grove orderly. But the social media storm was now trending nationwide. Mrs. Parker, we're handling it, he said, his tone clipped. Ellen scoffed. Handling it? You're ruining lives. The crowd cheered Ellen's words, their anger growing. Ashley Bennett, still filming, whispered to her husband, Daniel. This is bigger than us now. Daniel nodded, his eyes on Madison. He remembered Clara's kindness, how she'd baked cookies for his kids when they moved in. We need to end this right, he said. Tyler, Madison's nephew, clung to his uncle's side, his face streaked with tears. Why'd they hurt you, Uncle? He asked. Madison squeezed his hand. Some people don't understand, Tyler, he said, but others do. He glanced at the Marines, gratitude warming his chest despite the pain. Another twist hit like a shockwave. A news van pulled up to the cemetery gates, its lights cutting through the dusk. A reporter, Jessica Lee, jumped out, her cameraman already rolling. We're live from Willow Grove, she said into her microphone. A veteran was tossed by HOA security at his wife's grave, and the community is fighting back. The crowd roared, some waving at the camera. Robert Klein's face paled. He hadn't expected the media this fast. Carter, get those zip ties off the ground, he hissed at Jason, trying to clean up the scene. Jason scrambled to pick them up, his hands shaking under the camera's glare. Sarah, the Marine, stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Klein, this veteran deserves respect, not handcuffs, she said. You need to make this right. The other Marines nodded, their silence louder than words. Liam, the youngest, spoke up. I served 2 tours. Never thought I'd see a brother treated like this at home. The crowd murmured in agreement, their phones catching every word. Robert raised his hands, trying to calm things. Everyone, please, we'll sort this out, he said, but his voice wavered. He knew the HOA's reputation was crumbling with every second on live TV. Madison struggled to his feet, helped by Daniel and Tyler. His legs shook, but his voice was steady. I just wanted to say goodbye to my wife, he told the reporter, Jessica, who held her microphone close. Clara was my everything. I wasn't hurting anyone. Jessica's eyes softened. Can you tell us about Clara? She asked. Madison paused, his mind flooding with memories. Clara's laugh at their first dance, her strength during chemo, her hand in his as she slipped away. She was my home, he said, his voice cracking. I couldn't leave her alone. The crowd fell silent, some wiping tears. Tyler hugged Madison tight, his sobs muffled against his uncle's jacket. Jason, watching from the side, felt a knot in his stomach. He'd wanted to prove himself, to show he could enforce the rules. Now, with his mother's disappointment, the Marine stares, and the news cameras, he saw the cost. I didn't mean for this, he muttered to Emily, who shook her head. We should have listened, she said. Robert Klein, desperate to save face, approached Madison. Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry for the misunderstanding, he said, his voice loud for the cameras. But Madison looked past him to Clara's grave and whispered, This isn't over, Clara. I'll make it right. The Marines stood closer, their presence a promise that he wouldn't face this alone. Madison Hayes stood by Clara's grave, his legs shaky but his heart steady, surrounded by the Marines' protective circle. The Willow Grove Cemetery buzzed with tension, the crowd's murmurs mixing with the hum of the news van's generator. Jessica Lee, the reporter, held her microphone close, her cameraman zooming in on Madison's weathered face. Mr. Hayes, what do you want people to know? She asked. Madison's eyes flicked to Clara's headstone, the words beloved wife carved deep. I want people to know Clara deserved better than this, he said, his voice low but clear. She fought so hard, and I just wanted to honor her. The crowd quieted, some nodding, others wiping tears. Tyler, his nephew, clung to his side, whispering, You're doing good, Uncle. Daniel Hayes, the Marine leader, stood tall beside Madison, his eyes scanning the scene. This man's a hero, he told Jessica, his voice firm. He doesn't deserve to be tossed for grieving. The other Marines, Jake, Sarah, Liam, and Ethan, nodded, their dress blue sharp under the news van's lights. Sarah spoke up, her voice cutting through the noise. We stand with our brother. The HOA needs to answer for this. The crowd cheered, phones still recording. Ashley Bennett's live stream now hitting tens of thousands of views. Robert Klein, The HOA president shifted nervously, his tie loose from the chaos. He knew the viral video was a disaster for Willow Grove's image. A sharp twist broke the moment. A second news van pulled up, this one from a bigger network, its logo bright in the dusk. A reporter, Mark Davis, jumped out, his crew already filming. "We're live with a developing story," he announced. A veteran tossed by HOA security, community outrage grows. Robert's face went white. 2 news crews meant national attention, and the HOA's strict rules were now under a microscope. He turned to Jason Carter, his voice a hiss. "You caused this mess, Carter. Fix it." Jason, still holding the taser, looked lost. His mother, Linda Carter, grabbed his arm. "Apologize to Mr. Hayes now," she said, her voice shaking with anger. Jason hesitated, his pride battling his fear. "I was following orders," he muttered, but no one listened. Emily Brooks, the HOA officer, broke her silence. She stepped toward Madison, her eyes wet. "I'm so sorry," she said, loud enough for the cameras. "I have a son, and I'd hate for him to see me act like this." Madison looked at her, his face soft but firm. "You didn't stop it," he said. Emily nodded, tears falling. "I know. I'll make it right." She turned to Michael Turner, who was already on his radio, calling for the HOA's legal advisor. "We need someone higher up," Michael said, his voice urgent. "This is out of control." The crowd cheered Emily's apology, but their anger at Jason and Robert grew louder. Chants of justice for Madison, echoing through the cemetery. Another twist hit. A man in a suit pushed through the crowd, Mr. Tom Reed, the HOA's legal advisor. He'd been at a dinner when Ashley's video hit his phone, shared by a colleague. "Klein, what's going on?" Tom demanded, his glasses glinting. Robert stammered, "It's a misunderstanding." Carter overreacted. Tom's eyes narrowed as he saw Madison, still pale from the taser, with Tyler and the Marines around him. "You tossed a veteran at his wife's funeral?" Tom asked, his voice cold. He turned to Jessica and Mark, the reporters. "The HOA will investigate this fully," he said, trying to calm the storm. But the crowd wasn't buying it. "Fire Carter," someone shouted, and others joined in. Daniel Hayes stepped forward, his Marine training keeping him calm. "Mr. Reed, this isn't just about an investigation," he said. "This is about respect. Madison served our country, and your rules disrespected him." Jake, another Marine, added, "We don't leave our own behind. Not in war, not here." The crowd roared, their support for Madison growing. Tyler, still by Madison's side, looked up. "Uncle, they're fighting for you," he said, his voice proud. Madison managed a small smile, his hand on Tyler's shoulder. He thought of Clara, how she'd always believed in standing up for what's right. "She'd be proud of you, kid," he said softly. A final twist shook the scene. A woman's voice rang out from the crowd. "I have proof." It was Mrs. Karen Walsh, a neighbor who'd been at Clara's funeral. She held up her phone, showing a photo of Madison laying the rose on Clara's casket that morning. "He had permission to stay," she shouted. The cemetery manager approved it. Robert Klein's jaw dropped. He'd been told no one was allowed after hours, but Karen's photo proved otherwise. The reporters swarmed her, Jessica asking, "Can you confirm this?" Karen nodded, her voice firm. "I heard the manager tell Madison he could stay as long as he needed." The crowd erupted, their anger now aimed at Robert's mismanagement. Madison felt a spark of hope, his eyes back on Clara's grave. He whispered, "We're getting there, Clara." The Marines tightened their circle, their presence a shield. Daniel looked at Tom Reed. "Fix this, or we'll make sure the world knows," he said. The news cameras caught every word, and Ashley's live stream spiked again. Robert, Jason, and the HOA faced a reckoning, but Madison just wanted peace, to finish his goodbye to Clara, with the community and his brothers by his side. Madison Hayes stood by Clara's grave, his breath uneven from the taser's sting, but his spirit lifted by the Marines around him. The Willow Grove Cemetery pulsed with energy, the crowd's chants of justice for Madison, echoing under the moonlight. Daniel Hayes and his Marine team, Jake, Sarah, Liam, and Ethan, stood firm, their dress blues a symbol of loyalty. Jessica Lee and Mark Davis, the reporters, kept their cameras rolling, capturing every tense moment. Ashley Bennett's live stream surged, comments flooding in from across the country. Madison clutched Tyler's hand, his nephew's eyes wide with hope. He whispered, "Clara, we're fighting for you." A sharp twist shook the scene. A man in a worn jacket pushed through the crowd, Mr. Greg Thompson, the cemetery manager. Karen Walsh's photo had jogged his memory. "I told Mr. Hayes he could stay," Greg shouted, his voice cracking. "I gave him permission after the funeral." Robert Klein, the HOA president, spun around, his face red. "You never told me," he snapped. Greg shook his head. "I sent you an email, Klein. You didn't read it." The crowd gasped, their anger turning on Robert. Jessica, the reporter, shoved her microphone toward Greg. "So, the HOA was wrong?" she asked. Greg nodded. "Completely wrong. Madison's no trespasser." Jason Carter, still holding the taser, felt the ground shift. His mother, Linda, glared at him. "You didn't even check," she said, her voice low but sharp. Jason's shoulders slumped. "I thought I was doing my job," he mumbled. Emily Brooks, now openly crying, turned to Madison. "I'll testify if you sue," she said, her voice shaking. "This was a mistake." Madison looked at her, his eyes tired but kind. "Mistakes hurt, Emily," he said. The crowd cheered her honesty, but their boos aimed at Jason grew louder. Michael Turner stepped forward, his radio silent. "I'm done covering for you, Jason," he said, walking toward Madison. "Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry." Another twist hit. A police car rolled up to the cemetery gates, its lights flashing. Two officers stepped out, drawn by reports of a disturbance. Officer Maria Lopez approached, her hand on her radio. "What's going on?" she asked, eyeing the Marines and the crowd. Daniel explained, his voice calm but firm. "HOA security tossed a veteran for no reason. We're here to protect him." Maria's eyes widened as she saw Madison, still pale, with Tyler beside him. She turned to Robert. "You authorized this?" Robert stammered. "It was a misunderstanding." Maria shook her head, calling for her sergeant. "This is above my pay grade," she said. The crowd's energy surged, phones capturing the police arrival. Tom Reed, the HOA lawyer, tried to take control. "Officers were handling this internally," he said, but Maria cut him off. "Tasing a veteran isn't internal. It's assault." Madison spoke up, his voice steady despite the pain. "I just wanted to say goodbye to my wife," he told Maria. She nodded, her face softening. "I'm a veteran too, sir. I get it." Tyler looked up, hope in his eyes. "They'll help us, Uncle," he said. Madison squeezed his hand, thinking of Clara's courage. "Maybe they will," he said. A final twist unfolded. A woman's shout broke through. "I found the email." It was Ashley, scrolling through her phone. She'd hacked into the HOA's public server, finding Greg's email to Robert about Madison's permission. "It's time-stamped," she yelled, showing it to the reporters. The crowd roared, their outrage peaking. Robert's face fell, his authority crumbling. Daniel looked at Madison. "You're free, brother," he said. Madison nodded, his eyes on Clara's grave. He felt her strength, guiding him through the storm, as the Marines and the crowd stood ready to see justice done. Madison Hayes stood by Clara's grave, his body sore, but his spirit unbroken, the moonlight casting a soft glow on Willow Grove Cemetery. The crowd's chants of justice for Madison grew louder, fueled by Ashley Bennett's discovery of the email proving Madison's right to stay. The Marines, Daniel, Jake, Sarah, Liam, and Ethan, stood firm around him, their dress blues a shield of honor. Tyler, Madison's nephew, gripped his hand, his eyes bright with hope. "We're winning, Uncle," he whispered. Madison nodded, his thoughts on Clara, her strength guiding him. He whispered, "This is for you, love." The news cameras, led by Jessica Lee and Mark Davis, zoomed in, capturing the tense scene. Officer Maria Lopez, the policewoman, stood between the crowd and Robert Klein, the HOA president, whose face was pale under the flashing lights. "This email changes everything," Maria said, holding Ashley's phone. "Mr. Hayes, you're free to stay." Madison's shoulders relaxed, but his eyes stayed on Clara's headstone. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick. Maria turned to Robert. "Your team assaulted a man with permission. "That's on you." Robert stammered, "I didn't know about the email." The crowd booed, their anger sharp. A new twist hit. A man's voice shouted, "I saw it happen." It was Mr. Paul Evans, a retired firefighter who'd been walking his dog nearby. He held up his phone, showing a video of Jason tossing Madison. "I recorded it all," Paul said, his voice steady. Carter didn't even ask questions. The crowd erupted, phones flashing as they shared Paul's video. Jessica rushed to him, her microphone ready. "You're saying this was unprovoked?" she asked. Paul nodded. Madison was just standing there, grieving. Jason Carter, now cornered, dropped his taser, his hands shaking. "I didn't mean to hurt him," he said, his voice small. His mother, Linda, shook her head. "You didn't think, Jason," she said, her disappointment heavy. Emily Brooks stepped forward, her face wet with tears. "I'm quitting," she announced, loud enough for the cameras. "I can't work for an HOA that does this." The crowd cheered, some clapping for her courage. Michael Turner nodded, his own voice firm. "I'm out too," he said. "This isn't what I signed up for." Robert Klein's face fell further, his authority slipping away. Tom Reed, the HOA lawyer, tried to salvage things. "We'll review our policies," he said, but the crowd shouted him down. Too late, someone yelled. Daniel Hayes, the Marine, spoke up, his voice calm but powerful. "This isn't about policies. It's about respect. Madison deserves better." Another twist unfolded. A woman in a business suit arrived, Ms. Diane Miller, the HOA's vice president. She'd been out of town, but rushed back after seeing Ashley's live stream. "Robert, you've lost control," she said, her voice icy. She turned to Madison. "Mr. Hayes, on behalf of the HOA, I'm deeply sorry. You can stay as long as you need." Madison looked at her, his eyes tired but grateful. "I just want to honor my wife," he said. Diane nodded, then faced Jason. "You're suspended, effective now," she said. Jason's head dropped, the weight of his actions crushing him. The crowd's cheers grew louder, sensing justice. Tyler hugged Madison, his voice shaky. "They're fixing it, Uncle." Madison smiled faintly, his hand on Clara's headstone. "She'd be proud of this," he said. Daniel knelt beside him. "We've got your back, brother," he said. The Marines stood tall, their presence a quiet promise. Maria, the policewoman, radioed her sergeant. "We need to file charges against Carter," she said. The news cameras caught every word, and Ashley's stream hit 1 million views. Madison felt Clara's strength, knowing the fight wasn't over. But he wasn't alone. Madison Hayes stood by Clara's grave, the moonlight soft on Willow Grove Cemetery, his heart heavy, but lifted by the justice unfolding. The Marines, Daniel, Jake, Sarah, Liam, and Ethan, formed a quiet guard around him, their dress blues a symbol of brotherhood. Tyler, his nephew, held his hand, whispering, "We did it, Uncle." The crowd's cheers echoed, fueled by the email proof, Paul's video, and the HOA's crumbling authority. Jessica Lee and Mark Davis, the reporters, kept filming, their cameras catching every moment. Ashley Bennett's live stream hit 2 million views, comments calling Madison a hero. Madison touched Clara's headstone, whispering, "We honored you, love." A final twist sealed the HOA's fate. Officer Maria Lopez's sergeant, Captain John Riley, arrived, his face stern. He'd seen Paul's video and Ashley's email evidence. "Carter, you're under arrest for assault," he said, cuffing Jason's wrists. Jason's face went pale, his mother, Linda, turning away, tears in her eyes. "You brought this on yourself," she said. The crowd roared, their cheers a wave of revenge for Madison's pain. Jason's head dropped as Maria led him to the police car, his HOA badge now a mark of shame. Emily Brooks and Michael Turner, who'd quit, watched silently, their guilt heavy, but their choice clear. Robert Klein, the HOA president, tried to slip away, but Ms. Diane Miller, the vice president, blocked him. "You're done, Robert," she said, her voice cold. "The board's voting you out tonight." A new twist hit. Diane held up her phone, showing a petition started by Ashley, signed by hundreds of residents demanding Robert's removal and new HOA rules. "The community's spoken," Diane said. Robert's shoulders slumped, his power gone. The crowd chanted, "No more Klein," as reporters swarmed Diane. We'll reform the HOA, she promised. Mr. Hayes, your story changed us. Madison nodded, his eyes soft. Just let people grieve in peace, he said. Daniel Hayes knelt beside Madison, his voice warm. You fought like a Marine, brother, he said. The other Marines saluted Madison, a gesture of respect that brought tears to Tyler's eyes. Clara's watching, Uncle, Tyler said, hugging him. Madison smiled, his first real smile since Clara's passing. He thought of her strength, how she'd pushed him to stand tall. She's proud, he said. The crowd parted as Madison laid a new rose on Clara's grave, one Sarah had handed him. I'll always come back, he whispered, finally saying his goodbye. Another twist closed the chapter. Jessica announced on live TV, a local veterans group just started a fund for Madison Hayes, raising thousands in minutes. The crowd cheered, some pledging donations on Ashley Stream. Paul, the firefighter, stepped forward, offering Madison a job at his community center. We need men like you, he said. Madison shook his hand, his voice steady. I'll think about it, he said, hope flickering in his chest. The Marines escorted him through the crowd, residents clapping, some saluting. Madison felt Clara's love, knowing he'd honored her memory. The moral lesson rang clear. Justice comes when good people stand together. Jason faced charges, his career over. Robert lost his position, the HOA forced to change. Madison, with his community and brothers, found peace at Clara's side. The crowd dispersed, but the story lived on, shared across the nation. A reminder to respect those who serve and to fight for what's right. Madison looked at the stars, Clara's light shining down, and knew he'd never stand alone again.